Howdy, all you just people. I'm here today to review The Passion of the Christ. So, one thing that I want to go on and I want to mention here is really, I want to go into this review as if this is any other film, and I should be really having it be like that anyways. Regardless of how profound this story is, regardless of how accurate it may be, so on and so forth. I didn't want to go on and do this review for some kind of religious debate or kind of a heavy disagreement that, oh, I disagree because I feel like this movie is to be such and such thing. I have my opinion, people can have their opinions, and that is what it is with this kind of film. And so going on for this movie, again, I just want to treat this like any other film that I've ever seen in my life. And so with that said, going into The Passion of Christ, I would go on and say that I have seen Ben-hur also before I was to go on and see this movie, because I was kind of not quite sure if I really ever wanted to go and watch this film, but I'm just kind of you know what? Since it's been a long time since it's a movie that's conveniently on Tubi right now, TUBI, or I think it's on Amazon right now for free. I decided, well, since this movie is conveniently found, even though for some people they may not even know that this whole entire movie is to be done in an entire other language, and so people are going to have to subtitle this out the whole entire time watching this movie kind of play out through subtitles. So going into this film, if I were to go and choose between Ben-hur or The Passion of Christ, I would go on and choose Ben-hur, of course, every single time. The Charlton Heston Ben-hur movie, because really, in that Ben-hur film, there is just a lot of other story going on, and then we get to the point of meeting up with Jesus, and we get to see how that story all plays out. Whereas in this movie, we just kind of have a guy getting beaten up and tortured through 2 hours of a film, and I don't feel like there's story enough, or I don't quite understand the context of the story. I don't get what is really going on. I just kind of see random events that are kind of happening where we go on. We have Jesus who's kind of in the later parts of this movie just kind of randomly talking to people, and I don't understand what the significance of those scenes are. It just kind of feels like nothing to me. It's the truth. So this movie doesn't really have enough of a story for me. I can go on and say that this movie does have a story, but it doesn't have enough for 2 hours. It's just me just kind of how many numerous times we're gonna have to watch somebody just get whipped, or just dragging a cross. It's just that's what takes up the 2 hours, and I'm no, I would much rather see a movie with a story instead of a guy being beaten for 2 hours. Just consistent, the consistent repetition of it is just that's why I don't I don't like movies. I would have to forcibly compare this to a horror film, kind of like Saw, where of course there is those elements that are kind of like this film, but not a there is gaps in between the film. There's a mystery going on. There's a problem to be solved. Kind of intermittent within these kind of these things. Whereas this movie is just straight up yeah, how many times can we see somebody get whipped? How many numerous times do we have to go through this? And that's where I go on and be yeah, I just didn't like this movie because of that. Because I would have wanted a lot more story, somewhere to understand this character a lot more. We didn't get that. So, or I would have liked actually to have some kind of lead up to getting to that moment, instead of just these kind of rando scenes that keep kind of popping in between all these things that are happening. And of course, I don't need to be re-explained the origin story of this character through some of the, like, oh well, if you don't know this character, I'm going to tell you the whole backstory of him. No, no, like they should have done that in the film. They should have obviously done that in the film, and they didn't. Um, and so, like, that's why I kind of feel like this movie is just to be a waste to me. Um, I would much rather go on and watch other things uh, that are to have been a thing to kind of keep my attention, because this is like, oh, this is going on, oh, I can just kind of, like, I can do a bunch of side things, I can go on and like, and then, oh, it's still like we're still going at this, okay, great, I can this movie is a multitasking thing because you're not really paying attention to it. Because why would you want to just, yeah, how can I just watch every single just thing unfold in here within 2 hours? Like, really, if you have 2 hours to just eat, then this movie's for you. Um, that's just how I feel about this film. I just don't like it. So, with that said, let's go on to that double five time territory. Let's just go on to spoilers about this film. I'm going to try to break this down the best that I can and hopefully be able to say these things in utter detail, but really, at some points, I won't know the actual context of some of these rando like scenes. So, with that said, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil the Passion of the Christ. So, we go on in the very beginning of this film, and we, of course, have Jesus, who is with a guy named Peter, and another guy, or a couple other guys that are kind of following Jesus. Jesus is going on and praying to God, trying to, like, have God give him kind of some strength or some kind of power for what is to possibly happen next, to where we all of a sudden are having Judas, who is going on to turn Jesus into these priests that live in this temple for 30 silver. Going on and later on regretting that decision, trying to give these guys back their 30 silver to let Jesus go. And of course, these priests, these elders are going on and telling Judas, it's like, well, sorry, like, this has already been done. Like, there is no going back from this now. So Judas later on in the film is to just be laying in the laying down in some part of some um, part of town, just kind of sick about what he had gone and done. And all of a sudden, we have these kids that are starting to beat him up. All of a sudden, we start to have these kids who start to look very much more demonic-ish, and are going on and consistently going on and beating up Judas. And we have Judas, who is starting to see all these monsters and these demons and so on and so forth, to the point of Judas realizing that he has gone on to um, like, do the wrong thing here, and he decides to go on and noose himself, rope himself, sadly enough. So we go on into this story, and so Jesus is to get turned in, and are having a bunch of armored men go after Jesus. And so we, of course, have Peter and a number of Jesus' followers trying to defend Jesus, trying to combat against these men. And we, of course, have Jesus who's telling Peter and a number of people to put their arms down, because we live by the sword, we die by the sword. So just go on and just kind of drop your swords. Jesus was also, while he was praying, we have at some point where Satan is supposedly kind of lurking around, going on and mentioning to Jesus uh, that he, of course, is like, are you really going to, like, do what you're going to need to do for these people, like carry all their sins and go on and perform this act? Do you, like, isn't that kind of a burden for you to have to go and perform this for these people, and so on and so forth? Having kind of Satan kind of whispering in Jesus's ear to kind of persuade him not to go on and do this, because if we really technically think about it, supposedly Satan is to have caught, who is to have in some stories been an angel called Morning Star, and technically Satan is at some point to possibly be, in some stories, Jesus' brother. And so there may be a point when Satan is trying to persuade Jesus to save him, possibly. Save him from all of this hardship. And we could have it to where at the end of the movie we end up seeing Satan, who of course is to be very upset by the ending of this story, which is to be Jesus having to get crucified. Of course, if people don't know the story, it leads up to that. So we go on and we have Jesus, who of course is to had been talking to Peter. Peter is going on and saying that he was to want to follow Jesus to the end, whether it means that he is to die, whether it means that anything is to happen horrifically to him. Peter will welcome that to follow Jesus, and Jesus is going on and telling Peter, it's like, well, that's great and all, but like eventually you're gonna go and deny uh, ever being a part or ever being with me like 3 times later on in the film. So supposedly the main reason why Judas was to supposedly turn on Jesus is because Jesus was having a Last Supper, which I'm not quite sure if they cover that in this movie, but it seems that Jesus is around a group of people at this table, kind of breaking bread. So I have to assume that that's possibly the Last Supper. And I guess at some point Jesus was going to go on and say that there was going to be at some point one person was going to betray him in this Last Supper, and I guess that is to go on and be Judas. So we go on into this story, and of course have Jesus, who is to be uh, talking to these priests, talking to these elders, and they're to go on and ask Jesus if he is who he says he is, or because there's a bunch of claims that are going on talking to Jesus, and so they want to talk to him directly to ask him if he is to say that he is some kind of Messiah, or that he is to possibly be the Son of God, or he is to basically be this king of some other world. And Jesus is to go on and say, yes, I am that man. And so they're just like, well, okay, that's blasphemous. And they want to go on and they want to take Jesus, who is now to be chained and is to, at some point, be fallen off this one bridge, and he is to be dragged up to have Jesus go on and see Judas, like, at the bottom of this bridge. So we go on and we have Jesus, that of course is to be judged by these elders to say, like, okay, we need to take this to a proper authority for him to be taken care of, for him to eventually be kind of gone on and punished for his crime of just blasphemy. So we go on and we have the elders and Jesus going on, and he is to be taken to Pontius, who is to, I guess, be, I guess, the Romans king. We also have it where at some points the Romans were going on and seeing that the elders were to be taken in Jesus to be judged, and the Romans were like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And the elders were kind of swaying these Romans away to just be like, "Oh, like we just found somebody and he did some crime," and the Romans are just like, "Okay, all right, well, we're gonna have to go and tell Abinator, who of course is to be the second-hand man of Pontius, like what the heck is going on." So we go on and we have Jesus, who is to be sent to Pontius. Pontius goes on and he is to of course, start asking this man in private, Jesus, um, kind of all these things that kind of the elder had asked him. So while Jesus is being questioned by these elders, we had a moment where Peter was watching on as Jesus was being questioned, and Peter all of a sudden was getting grabbed by a bunch of people saying like, "Oh yeah, you're with him. Like, hey, you're working with that guy." And Peter did go on and say that he didn't. It was kind of pushing people off, people trying to get away, running off to eventually smack right into Jesus' mother Mary, and going on and just crying on the fact that yeah, Peter did do exactly what Jesus told him he was going to do at some point. We also had a scene where Jesus was making this long table, where I guess a lot of people were going to go on at some point to eat dinner on, and have these long chairs and these of course long um, tables and so on and so forth. And Mary was mentioning, oh, it'll never work. Like, this will never happen. And Jesus is like, I don't know. Like, and so, yeah, so we end up going on and having like this tradition of having us eating at this dinner table and with all these chairs, and that might have been possibly the start of that. So we go on. We now have Jesus that's talking to Pontius, and Jesus is telling Pontius the truth. And so now Pontius is decide, well, like, what punishment should we fit for this crime? And a lot of people are going on and immediately just like, well, crucify him, like, kill him. And Pontius is just like, no, like, I'm just gonna go on and punish this guy, because Pontius is kind of in fear, and he talks to Claudius or Claudia about this, which is to be his wife, to say it's like, well, hey, like, what's to stop them after they go on and they want this guy like dead or killed or whatever? What's to stop them after going after this guy to come after me? Like, this guy's a martyr. This guy is like a big like ideal, like idol and whatever. And like, kind of what's to like stop them coming after me and trying to kill me off? So we're trying to have Pontius like prevent this as long as humanly possible, to even the point where Pontius is going on after Jesus is to get whipped numerous times, almost to death. And we have Abernather, who goes on to see that Jesus has been whipped more than he should have, and he's basically almost like scourged to death. And so we go on and have these guys who are to drag Jesus off, as we have Mary and Magdalene who are going on and trying to wipe out all this blood, trying to collect all this blood, keeping it on to some towels. As we have at one point where they are to tell us that Jesus at some point was to cure the blind and kind of help a lot of people along the way. Going on and having at some point where Jesus is to bump into Magdalene, and she is to kind of like climb onto Jesus, and I guess he's to possibly save her at some point. So we go on into this story, and so we of course have Mary, who's kind of forced to watch on to see what's going on with her son. And there's nothing she can really do, to the point of her just going on and just like, well, like, I guess we just like we can just kind of follow him, but that's all that we can really do here. So Jesus goes on, and we have Pontius, who is to, before Jesus is to get judgment by being whipped, we had Pontius, who was trying to pass the buck to a guy named Herod. Herod? Herod. Jesus goes and talks with Herod as these elders are kind of still following Jesus around to make sure that he's getting the judgment he deserves. And Herod is going on and talking with Jesus and saying, like, no, this guy is no Messiah. This guy is just crazy. Like, I'm not going to judge this man. It's like, I'm not going to give him no punishment. He's just mentally ill. I'm not going to do anything with this man. So go on somewhere else and seek judgment elsewhere. So that pushes us on to have Jesus going back with Pontius for him to get whipped. And so Pontius is to showcase how bad Jesus now looks, as we have a bunch of these guards who are to go on and also forcefully have Jesus being crowned with this crown that is basically just be like these things of poked like wood that is just piercing into Jesus's head. We go on, and of course we have Jesus, who of course is to now be forced to let me pause here for 1 second. So now we have Jesus, who is forced to be displayed for all these guys and all these men. And so now Pontius is saying, like, okay, what should we do now with this man? As we go on, and we also have a murderer, who of course is to be Barbarous, Barabbas, who of course be this kind of murderer, this killer. And we of course have Pontius, who's asking these people, it's like, well, hey, will you let a known killer go free and still have me go on and punish Jesus to death? And a lot of people are going, I'm like, yeah, free Barbarous, free him, and then punish Jesus. So this guy just goes on and goes free, and Pontius is just like, okay, well, I guess like they forced my hand. We have Claudia, who's kind of just so in disgust that she, of course, is to just walk off because there's nothing that they can do now. So we go on and we have Pontius, who, of course, to force Jesus to carry this cross and through town. And we consistently have it to where, of course, Jesus is so weak. And, of course, he has barely been able to eat or drink anything because he's being punished. And so we go on, and, of course, we have Jesus just trying to, like, just consistently drag this cross with a number of other people who are to seek the same punishment. So we have at some point where Mary is trying to speak to her son, and we have her kind of being tossed aside. And we have, of course, Jesus consistently praying to God, telling him to forgive them and to not forsake them, like they don't know what they're doing, so on and so forth. So they go on, and we have it to where Jesus keeps continuing to fall over and has the inability of carrying this cross. So we go on and we forcibly have one of these soldiers that is to volunteer some random person to start carrying this cross with Jesus along with him. And so we consistently have this man who's kind of telling Jesus, it's like, we're almost there, just a little bit further, like, just keep doing this. To the point of the whole entire time they're getting whipped consistently if they don't keep going. And they're getting hit by things, and they're getting hit by fruit and hit by things all the way through this whole spot. To the point where Jesus continues to keep falling over. And so we have at some points where people are kicking Jesus, they're beating him and whatever. And we have this guy who's kind of holding the cross along with Jesus, who's saying, like, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore if you keep hitting him and kicking him and whatever. You keep humiliating him. Like, just let him just continue to drag this cross, and we'll make it there. So we go on, and we, of course, have Jesus and the two other men that are being punished, as we kind of have the one guy who's just kind of like asking, he's kind of talking to Jesus to like hope that he is to be forgiven as he's going to die soon also. So we have Jesus, of course, that is to be uh, nailed to this cross, and we, of course, are going on and watching this all unfold. As weirdly, we have a bunch of these guards that are all just like satisfied by the punishment of Jesus, and they're just kind of like they're smiling ear to ear, and it's freaking like disgusting. And like these guys that are just kind of whipping this guy, and like blood is like spraying all over them, and they're just smiling ear to ear, and I'm like, this is freaking weird. This is a weird way to approach this. So we go on, and uh, we have these kind of lead up moments also throughout this film. If I had forgotten about any of them, I apologize, but that is what it is with this film. So we go on and have Jesus being nailed to the cross, and so now we have it to where they're just kind of waiting for this guy to die. We have at one point where Jesus is saying that he's thirsty. They go on and they take a sponge onto a spike and try to get some kind of water to Jesus through a speared sponge. But we go on in this story and, of course, have Jesus, who is to die on the cross, as well as two other men. All of a sudden, we have some kind of bizarrish earthquake that seems to be happening, or some kind of weathered event. And so all of a sudden, we have these guys that are wanting to make sure that all three of these men are all dead. Going and having one of the guards stab into Jesus to see the rest of his blood flow out. Going on and breaking these guys' legs or knees or whichever to possibly hope that they're going to be dead also. So we go on and have at one point before Jesus was to die, he was to kind of talk to his mother and talk to, I believe, a guy named John, who I believe was following Jesus. And so we go on and we have Jesus die, and so they end up taking him off the cross, and we just have Mary, who's just kind of holding her, sadly enough, dead son. So really, at the end of this story, we supposedly have it where, and I'm not quite sure how accurate this is, we are to see a cave open at the end of this movie. And we see a man with holes in his hands, and we see a long-haired man who seems to look different than Jesus, next to some kind of, I'm assuming, white sack, of course, that of course is to be slowly but surely starting to crumble as air is to reach within this cave. We all of a sudden have possibly Jesus walking out of this cave, and that is how the movie, of course, is to end here. So with that said, we also had at one point after Jesus was to die, we had Satan, who of course was going on and I guess very vengeful and wanting to create an anger part to God, possibly maybe mentioning that his brother was to be killed here. And so maybe that's the possible reason why Satan was, of course, to be so evil, because he was so upset for what had happened through these events, so on and so forth. If anything else, there's probably little tiny details in this movie that I probably didn't go into. And a lot of times I just don't go into actual like line for line delivery of stuff. But so with that said, I think I am to go on and just feel fine about the way of which that I reviewed this. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about this movie, because I'm sure, regardless of what I say here, people are going to have their own opinions, which is perfectly fine. Hopefully, no one is going to disagree with me, because it is what it is. My opinion is what it is for this story, this movie, for whatever. You can go and list your own opinions about this film if you feel so strongly that you love, hate, or whichever about this film. Other than that, I think I'm just going to get out of here. Hopefully, I've technically covered everything, because more than likely, there's probably at a point in time where I probably had forgotten a number of things throughout this film. Um, Otherwise, I'm just going to say, hey, this movie is reviewed. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.